Every generation produces a star the media calls the next Michael Jackson, a dancer with clean moves, a singer with a big voice, a performer who fills a stadium. And every single time, if you actually look at the numbers, the comparison falls apart before it even starts. Because Michael Jackson didn't just have hits. He built a career made of firsts, milestones so specific and so tied to a certain moment in history that repeating them isn't just unlikely. It's mathematically and historically impossible. So today we're doing something different. Instead of just talking about the records everyone already knows, the sales figures and the Grammy counts you've heard 100 times, we're digging into 8 Michael Jackson achievements that history will never repeat. These aren't just impressive. They're locked in place by timing, by circumstance, by a version of the entertainment industry that simply doesn't exist anymore. Some of these will surprise you, even if you think you already know everything about the king of pop. Number 1 is the kind of fact that sounds made up until you check it yourself, twice. If you're into stories about legends and the actual numbers behind them, not just the hype, hit subscribe, because this is exactly what this channel is built for. Let's get into it. Number 8, the album that changed the rules before Thriller even existed. Before Thriller, before Bad, before any of the records people usually talk about, there was Off the Wall. Released in 1979, Off the Wall made Michael Jackson the first solo artist in history to land 4 top 10 singles from a single album. Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, Rock With You, Off the Wall, and She's Out of My Life all cracked the top 10, with the first 2 hitting number 1 outright. Here's why that matters. Nobody had done that before him. Not as a solo act, not one. And the reason this one is so easy to overlook is simple. Thriller was so massive 3 years later that it completely buried the fact that Michael was already rewriting the rulebook before most casual fans even knew his adult solo career had properly started. Think about what that means for the timeline. He wasn't building toward greatness. He arrived at it, quietly, at just 21 years old, with an album that critics initially treated as a stylish disco record and nothing more. It took years for people to fully appreciate that Off the Wall wasn't a warm-up act. It was the moment the rules of the entire industry started bending around one artist. He didn't become a record breaker with Thriller. He walked into Thriller already holding one. Number 7, the contract Sony called the biggest in entertainment history. In March 1991, Michael Jackson signed a deal with Sony that the company itself described as the largest entertainment contract ever negotiated for a single act. Not just in music, in entertainment, period. The agreement covered future albums, film projects, and television ventures, and analysts at the time estimated it could be worth as much as $1 billion over its lifetime. Why can't this happen again? Because the entire economics of the music business have changed. Labels don't hand out billion-dollar, career-spanning megadeals built on physical album sales anymore, because physical album sales don't drive the industry the way they did in 1991. That kind of contract was a product of a very specific era, one where a single artist's next album could realistically be projected to sell tens of millions of copies before a single track had even been recorded. Modern deals work completely differently. Today's biggest contracts are usually catalog acquisitions, a company buying the rights to decades of already existing music, not a bet on one living artist's future output. Sony wasn't just signing a musician in 1991, they were betting the future of their entertainment division on the idea that Michael Jackson could keep breaking his own records. That world is gone, and so is that kind of deal. Number 6, the first music video preserved by the Library of Congress. In 2009, the Library of Congress inducted Michael Jackson's Thriller video into the National Film Registry, an archive reserved for films considered culturally, historically, or artistically significant enough to preserve forever. It was the first music video in history to receive that honor. Not the first Michael Jackson video. The first music video, period, out of every artist, every genre, every era. This is a record that can only be set once. Someone had to be first. And it happened to be a 14-minute short film about a zombie dance, directed by John Landis, that cost around $500,000 to make back in 1983. It didn't just get preserved for nostalgia either. The Library of Congress specifically called it the most famous music video of all time when they made the announcement. Once that door was opened by Michael Jackson, it could never be opened by anyone else for the first time again. Other videos have been added since, but there will only ever be one first. The title is permanently his. Number 5, the night the Moonwalk was born. On March 25th, 1983, during a television special called Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, Forever, Michael Jackson performed Billie Jean and, for the first time in front of a national audience, did the Moonwalk. It wasn't the first time a version of that step had ever existed, but it was the moment that turned it into one of the most recognized pieces of choreography in the history of entertainment, instantly imitated by millions of people who had never taken a dance class in their life. Why this can't be repeated? Because it wasn't really about the steps themselves. Plenty of dancers had glided backward before. It was about the specific combination of a single live TV moment, a specific song, a specific audience of tens of millions watching the exact same broadcast at the exact same time, and a performer who could make an entire country stop what they were doing and rewind that memory forever in their heads. There was no replay button back then in the way we think of one today. No pausing, no rewatching on a phone 5 seconds later. People either caught it live or they heard about it from someone who did, and that scarcity is exactly what turned 4 seconds of choreography into a piece of permanent pop culture history. You cannot manufacture that kind of singular cultural spark twice. It happened once on that stage, and it belongs to that night alone. Number 4, 5 number ones. From one album, a record that took 25 years to even get tied. In 1987, Michael Jackson's album Bad became the first album in history to produce 5 consecutive number 1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. I Just Can't Stop Loving You, Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, and Dirty Diana. It took an entire 25 years before another artist even matched that number when Katy Perry tied it in 2011 with Teenage Dream. Tied it, not beaten it. To this day, in more than 3 decades, nobody has ever produced 6. That's the part people miss. Everyone remembers Thriller's dominance, but Bad, the album that was supposed to just be the difficult follow-up to the best-selling record of all time, quietly set a chart record that has survived disco, grunge, boy bands, the birth of hip-hop dominance, and the entire streaming revolution completely untouched at the very top spot. 5 in a row, not 5 scattered across the album's run. 5 back-to-back, before a 6th single even had the chance to try. Number 3, 37 weeks at number 1, a record. No solo artist has topped Thriller, didn't just sell well. It sat at number 1 on the Billboard 200 album chart for 37 weeks, a record for a solo artist that still stands today. Think about what that means in practice. For the better part of an entire year, if you looked at the best-selling album in America, it was the same one, over and over, week after week. In an era before streaming numbers could refresh a chart overnight, that kind of sustained, unbroken dominance required something the music industry hasn't produced from a single act since. The album cycle today moves in weeks, sometimes days. A hit album might hold the top spot for 1 week, get bumped, sneak back up for a second week thanks to a surprise deluxe edition, and everyone calls that a victory lap. An album holding number 1 for 37 weeks isn't just rare. In the current landscape, where streaming spreads listener attention across thousands of releases at once, it's essentially unthinkable. Number 2, top 10, hits across 5 different decades. Here's one that quietly might be the most impressive entry on this entire list. Michael Jackson is the first artist in history to land top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 across 5 separate decades, stretching from the 1970s all the way into the 2010s, with posthumous releases still charting years after his death in 2009. Why is this one basically unbreakable? Because it isn't about talent, it's about time. For any new artist to even attempt this, they would need a hit in their first decade of fame, and then remain commercially relevant decade after decade, for 40 or 50 years straight, all the way until long after their own death, still charting on the strength of a legacy strong enough to keep pulling in new listeners generation after generation. That's not a talent gap. That's a math problem nobody alive today has the runway left to solve in the same way Michael Jackson already did, because the clock on this one started back in the 1970s and simply never stopped running, even after he was gone. Number 1, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Twice. And here's the one that closes the list better than any sales figure could. Michael Jackson was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame not once, but twice. First in 1997 as a member of the Jackson 5, and again in 2001 as a solo artist, making him the youngest solo artist ever inducted into the hall at the time. 2 separate careers, 2 separate inductions, one man. Why will this never happen again in quite the same way? Because it requires an artist to build 2 fully independent, historically significant careers inside one single lifetime. One as a child prodigy fronting a family group before he was even a teenager, and a second, completely separate legacy as a solo global icon reshaping the entire music industry as an adult, both good enough to be recognized on their own individual merits by the exact same institution. Most artists spend an entire lifetime trying to build one legendary career, and most never manage it. Michael Jackson built 2, essentially back-to-back, starting the first one before he'd finished elementary school, and both of them earned him a place in the same Hall of Fame, under the same name, in the same city, 4 years apart. So, there it is. 8 achievements, and not one of them is a coincidence. Some of these are frozen in time because the industry itself moved on. Others are frozen because nobody has had the time, the era, or the singular moment to repeat them. Love him or question him? Argue about his legacy all you want in the comments. But these 8 facts don't need an opinion to back them up. They just sit there in the record books, exactly where he left them. Tell me which one of these you didn't know about before today. And if you made it all the way to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame story, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because there's a lot more like this coming.